I bought this 2015 Subaru STI at auction, sight unseen, for $3,650. I thought I had quite the steal of a deal on my hands, so when I took delivery of this car, I got started right away. New oil, new spark plugs, new battery, and I topped off all the fluids just for the engine to sound like this. Oh no! Rod knock. The short block was replaced 8,000 miles ago with a brand new OEM one, and it already spun a bearing. But that's fine. Why would I ever want to just buy a car with zero issues and enjoy it? I don't. I want them to be broken so I can keep shooting for that maxed out credit card high score. So far, so good. Anyway, I immediately started pulling the engine and disassembling it. I need to tear it all the way down so I can figure out what all I need to buy. And that is exactly what we're going to cover in this video. What I bought, why I bought what I bought, and what the price tag was in the end. Let's start with the price of the car, which was in fact $3,650. But I bought it at an auction who charges fees, and I paid for delivery because it was a 40-hour round trip. Now I'm going to be rounding all of the prices to the nearest whole number because who cares about the cents? Auction fees were $1,073 and delivery was $1,565. And in the first episode, before I even knew the engine was blown up, I had already spent $550 on the spark plugs, the fluids, and the battery. In the next video, when I pulled and disassembled the engine, I did put some new hood struts on that cost me $99 because I needed to keep the hood out of my way while it worked. Nothing crazy happened during the engine pull, except for I forgot one hose, and it scared me a little bit when it popped off. Oh, Jesus Christ. And of course, during the engine disassembly, we did in fact confirm cylinder 2 had spun a bearing. I should have known something was up when cylinders 1, 3, and 4 were around 125 psi, and cylinder 2 was all alone at 105 psi. The other thing I realized during the engine disassembly is just how little the previous shop cared to clean anything off. The entire engine was just disgusting. The shop also either didn't tell the customer that their turbo was shot, or the previous owner declined to get it repaired. Either way, that's something we're gonna have to take care of. I did also buy $400 worth of company 23 tools for the engine disassembly and the engine build. However, I will not be counting those towards the final price because I will just be using them for any future EJ builds that I do. The engine build video is of course where I spent a majority of the money on the build, so let's get into it. The machine shop charged me $570 to boil, hone, mill, vacuum check the valves, and to check the valve lash. Now that we got everything back from the machine shop and all of our parts are finally delivered, we can start assembling the engine. For the engine build, I bought a new crankshaft for $390, a connecting rod for $96, piston rings for $75, main and rod bearings for $120, a master gasket kit for $300, and all of the bolts for the entire engine assembly for $250. After the short block was assembled, I put on a new oil pump, which ran me $230. Then we could move on to making it a long block. So we got the heads on with some assembly lube and new cam seals. We threw on our water pump, which only has 8,000 miles on it, so I did not replace it. And finally, we can get our timing set. The timing belt apparently only had 8,000 miles on it as well, but I did end up replacing the belt for $55, the idler pulley for $64, and the timing belt tensioner for $147. After we verified the timing, we moved on to rebuilding our turbo. This was the worst turbo I've ever seen, so it needed a rebuild desperately. The entire rebuild kit was only $65 off of eBay, so this was actually one of the cheapest parts of the build, surprisingly. I did get a turbo for $50 from a viewer, which was just an amazing gesture from the community. I appreciate all of you so much, but unfortunately, I was not able to use that turbo. The wastegate had been welded shut for an external wastegate setup, and I'm not quite ready to go that route on this build yet. But he did let me keep the turbo for the future, so maybe that's coming soon. In the last episode is when we completed the rest of the engine build with a new coolant hose kit for $300, which sucks because I only ended up using like half the hoses. A new oil cooler was $260, a Killer B oil pickup was $149, a new oil pan for $105. I also did a cylinder 4 cooling mod, which was only $65, and brand new Group N engine mounts for $162. I also replaced the O2 sensor for $130 because it had some damage to the wires. Not sure if I did that or not. Oh, Jesus Christ. But it did come out of my wallet regardless. After we got the intake on, we were ready to get the engine back on the engine hoist and put it back in the car. But I had some work that needed to be done before I put the engine in. I cleaned, sanded, and painted the engine bay with a spray can of single stage paint, which was $45. I replaced the throw-up bearing with an ACT one for $80. The pitch stop and transmission mounts were upgraded to Group N mounts for $61 and $89 respectively. And I replaced the engine air filter for $60 and the cabin air filter for $40 as well. Now we can finally get the engine on the hoist, bolt on our clutch and pressure plate, drop the engine in, bolt up the bell housing bolts, the turbo, the starter, fill the oil, put in the spark plugs, put on the secondary air pump, and the front accessories, which leads us into the IAG air oil separator. The IAG AOS at the time was $440, but is a great way to keep oil out of the intake and keep the engine running clean and happy. So it's very worth doing. Finally getting closer to wrapping this thing up, I installed the intercooler with some new couplers, which were $100. Afterwards, I can put our radiator back in, vacuum test it, fill it, and put our intake and battery back in. Now I can finally flash our Cobb tune with our $652 Cobb tuner. And finally, we can experience our first start. Oh God, all right, this is it. Here we go. Yes, let's go, it sounds good. Now let's get this thing ready to drive. I just need to zip tie this wheel liner up, which gives you a nice shot of our new tires, which were $680. And then so soon after our first start, we can finally enjoy our first drive. All right, let's go for our first drive. How can you hate that? The last two things I didn't show you were wiper blades for $80 and WeatherTech floor mats for $220. So let's go over all of those prices in 5 categories. The car, with fees and delivery, $6,288. The engine rebuild, $2,753. The maintenance items were $2,031. I spent $1,456 on upgrades. And the extra stuff like the hood struts and the floor mats were $480. Bringing our grand total all the way up to $13,008. Man, nothing is ever as cheap as you hope, huh? I hope this video can give you guys insight on just how expensive stuff can get really fast. I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm sure we all know cars are expensive. We picked probably one of the most expensive hobbies besides just owning private Lear jets. If I didn't do any of the upgrades, I could have probably got this thing on the road for $10,000. Probably could have saved even more if I did the 40-hour round trip and didn't pay for delivery. But that's not what I enjoy. Honestly, if this car didn't already have the intake and the exhaust, I would have spent another $1,500 on those too. But luckily, I didn't have to. Feel free to leave any questions or comments down below. I try to respond to every single one I get. If you want to follow me on this crazy YouTube journey, I will be continuing the 2021 GR Super project right after this. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.